Greetings all, and welcome to Dave's Craft Room. And on today's video, I'm gonna do a trunk show of quilts that I've made on my channel. Some of the quilts I've already given away to the people, so I don't still have them, but those that I still have, we're gonna do a trunk show. And all the quilts that you're gonna see on here have a video with them that you can go and watch the video on how I made it as well. On my channel, I like to start with an idea and take the idea all the way to fruition over the course of one video. And it's self-contained, each one is standalone, and that's essentially what I like to do on my channel. Sometimes I use patterns, sometimes I follow the pattern, sometimes I use a pattern and I don't even follow it. I like to change it up and Daviditize it and do whatever I want. Other times I don't even use a pattern at all. I make it up completely from scratch, which I love doing too. It just depends. Whatever project I'm excited about, I'll do it. This is where I work. This is Dave's Craft Room. This is my ironing surface, and this right here is a wool army blanket that's doubled over, and I just iron on it. It works. This is my iron. I have a Panasonic wireless iron. I like it very much. One of the comments said, "Where did you get your small iron?" I think it's average size. Panasonic makes it. And then this is a cutting mat from Walmart. This is the pin cushion. Me and my mom made pin cushions together when she came out and visited me. You can watch that video as well. We just put stuffing in there and glued the fabric on top. Oh, a lot of people ask me about my Windex. It's not like an interesting story or nothing, and this is just tap water, by the way. Whenever I moved into this house, I was done setting up and I didn't have a spray bottle and it was late at night. I often stay up late and work late at night and there's no place open to buy a spray bottle. So I had a Windex bottle with like 1 inch left in it. So I just dumped it out and used that. And it's just tap water. And it's been 2 years, but like it works just fine. I just use it. I've been using it all along. I have 2 rulers, one which is missing. Where's my other ruler? Oh, it's downstairs. This is the ruler I use for most things. This is 3 inches by 18 inches. I do not like to have a huge, big ruler because I don't have a huge, big table. I find it too unwieldy. Anything larger than this. I've had this for like probably 4 or 5 years and it's fine. I don't like to have a lot of rulers around. I have this ruler and this one, and that's literally the only rulers I have. I do get comments periodically saying, "Oh, you need this or that ruler." I just don't like to have loads of rulers. I got one ruler and I can do everything with it. It has 60 degrees, 45 degrees, 30 degrees on it. And that's all I need. And they just live under here on a drawer thing. Over there I have a small drawer thing with bits and bobs for sewing. This is my brother PQ 1500 SL. I like it. I don't love it just because I've had so many issues with the tension. I struggle with the tension enough that unfortunately, I can't wholeheartedly recommend the machine, but I do like it. I like the knee bar, I like the cutter, and that's about it. It's a pretty simple setup. I do not love to have loads and loads and loads of notions because I find it cluttering, and I prefer to just have the simple basics. I have my rotary cutter here. Again, a simple one, nothing special. I have scissors here. And then I have a sign there that's relatively new. The sign was made by HDJ Signs. It was designed, the actual logo design was made by my good Judy, Abby. This is where I keep my fabric. That's yardage. Those are fat quarters / half yards-ish. This is Mount Scrapmore and more fabric and fabric I use for backing, and there's some battings down there. I like 80-20 cotton batting because I find that it's drapey without shrinking too much. Drawers full of fabric and stuff. I am a pre-wash person. I like to pre-wash. The reason I pre-wash is because I get fabric from all different sources. It's not usually that I've pulled all this fabric right off a bolt. Some of it's from eBay. It's been in someone else's house. I don't know where it came from. It may have been used. And it may have been washed already or not. I just don't necessarily always know. So then to think that I would mix that with fabric right off the bolt that's not been washed is a little bit questionable. I just prefer to pre-wash everything so that the fabric I'm working with is in the condition that it will end up in when the quilt is done. And then I'll still wash the quilt when it's done too. That's just my personal preference. A lot of other people are using only fabric that they just recently cut right off the bolt. In that case, it's probably all gonna shrink in a uniform way, if it's all gonna shrink. Whereas my projects, that's often not the case. The blade is closed. I know people freak out when I flip the blade around in here, and it may be hard to tell on camera, but the blade is closed. I'm not gonna hurt myself because it's closed. Anytime you see me doing this, the blade is closed, rest assured. My design wall is styrofoam, 1-inch thick styrofoam panels from the hardware store. They were too big to fit in my car the day I bought them, so I asked them to chop it in half, and they're just squares. And then I covered the whole thing in 100%, if I recall correctly, 100% cotton batting. Spray adhesive that on, and the tiles, the actual styrofoam tiles, are stuck on the wall with those command strips, the Velcro command strips. Let's get into the trunk show portion. And remember that any of the quilts I'm gonna show you, you can go on my channel, there will be links. You can go on the channel and watch how I made the whole quilt. So let's get started. They're not in any particular order, but let's just get started. And let's just go ahead and start with this. My claim to fame, in my opinion, this is my Cheez-It quilt. And it's one of my favorite quilts that I've ever made. And basically you have the Cheez-It block. This is the Cheez-It block. It's an orange square, log cabined with red, and then trimmed cattywampus so that each Cheez-It is slightly itself cattywampus. And then there's 3 pieces of button salt. There's, this is reverse applique to a reveal to make the hole. And then these lines are quilted in, the lines to outline the Cheez-It. And then this is Cheez-It fabric that I got from Spoonflower. This is quilted, in here is quilted, and then inside this block is tied with red yarn. I love this quilt. This quilt is so special because it was the first one that I got noticed by the actual brand, and Kellogg sent me a PR package which contained this hat and this bag, the string bag. So that was exciting for me, just to get noticed by a brand. All right, here we have, this quilt is called Take from the Past, Don't Let the Past Take from You. And this quilt is the 100 Days, 100 Quilt Blocks Challenge, year 2022. That pattern is called Kinship Fusion Sampler. This quilt was the first video I ever published, and I realized that I could post the blocks and participate in the challenge on Instagram, and then start to develop a following, and then publish the video at the end. And that's what I did. So it wasn't the first video I filmed and made, but it was the first one I published on my channel. And basically, each day I made another quilt block, and each day was a chance to come up with something creative and interesting and try to tell a story with it, and that's what I did. And then I posted the blocks on Instagram. There's so many different like mementos in this, like old neckties and people's clothing, including my own, and t-shirts and fabric from other projects and everything. So that's where it gets the name from, of Take from the Past, Don't Let the Past Take from You. This was one of my favorite quilt projects to make, and I always think of it as like, this is how I got my start on YouTube. But we've come full circle because I've now done this year's 100 Days, 100 Blocks Challenge, Maple and Eucalyptus. And matter of fact, let's show that one next. All right, so here we have A Gorfal's Tale, 17 Standard Evero Dupree, New Mexico, 6000 Junior the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th goes west. And this was this year's 100 Days, 100 Blocks Challenge, Maple and Eucalyptus pattern. I guess it doesn't probably look like anybody else's if you search that on Instagram, and that's because I didn't follow the pattern layout, nor was that like a requirement even. You were free to do whatever you wanted. But one option of the pattern is to use coping strips, or basically a frame around each block, to make them all the same size. I didn't do that. I made mine a collage. And basically the quilt tells a story of this creature called a Gorfal who comes from the planet Glamtron. And these creatures have the ability to travel outside of their bodies and enter the body of an unborn creature on a different planet or wherever they want. And that's what my character did, and then he lived out his 9 lives on the planet Earth. And he was doing all kinds of different adventures, like he ran a fast food joint called McWhisker Burger. He had his portrait painted by John Singleton Copley. He made loads of friends. This is Suzanthony. This is Bethany Jackson, the raccoon optometrist from Rancho Cucamonga. They met when they were taking helicopter lessons in Calabasas. He liked to celebrate Taco Tuesday. There's a whole Western story, and there's also background on why his middle name or his last name is New Mexico 6000. And there's also a love story, and he became a vampire. So you can watch the video and hear the whole story, but actually that's not even the whole story, because to get the whole story, you have to go on Instagram and you can see each block day by day. Each block is a different chapter of his life. Oh, and he was a Hollywood actor in the movie Catzilla and all 8 of its sequels. This was a huge creative undertaking for me to come up with a new story every single day. And so I'm very proud to have actually accomplished it. Together with this, I also did the Bonkers layout, which is the same quilt blocks, 500 of them, in a huge king-size quilt. Let's move on to the next quilt. All right, so here we go with this quilt. And this quilt was inspired by Chris O'Neill's channel, Sew the Distance. She has a series called Lessons from an Old Quilt, where she showed 2 quilts kind of like this. The block is basically a foundation piece stitch and flip block, and then I sashed them with this blue. I originally wanted the whole thing to be blue, but I ran out of the blue. I did not allow myself to buy any new fabric for this, so I just went into the stash and decided on black, and that's where the stair-step pattern came in of why there's black. This quilt is tied, and let's talk about it, because on my channel you'll see me do every different quilting method, whether it's hand quilting, small stitches, or big stitches with embroidery floss, or machine quilting, free motion quilting. The only thing you won't see me do is long arm, because I don't have a long arm, and tying. I like the ties. I think the ties in this case add interest. They keep the quilt together. It works. I confess that earlier on, I mean, the tying method is sometimes looked down on as kind of like a beginner method, or like, you know, kind of a hack, a cheater hack. I think it's a perfectly valid way to finish your quilt. It's not necessarily appropriate for every quilt, but that's also up to you. All it is a double knot. I got a lot of comments asking me how I tie it. I learned to tie the quilt by watching Donna Jordan's video on how she ties the quilt, but it's just a double knot. That's all it is. One knot and then another one. And that's literally all there is to it. And this is the back, blue plaid flannel. I made the mistake of not showing the back in the video, and I got a lot of comments asking to see it. I like a flannel backing. It adds weight and drapiness to the quilt and makes it warmer. I guess my favorite color is blue, because I always tend towards a blue plaid flannel, and that's that. So let's go to the next quilt. All right, this quilt is called Ew David, Cityscape Up and Down with Antlers, Hearts, and Mustaches. And this quilt is based off of the pattern From Dusk Till Dawn by Natalie Crabtree, which came in a Quilty Box subscription box. I don't think that subscription is available any longer, but I used to subscribe to the Quilty Box, and I loved the pattern very much, but I also wanted to Davitize it, and so I Davitized it. I added these cityscapes. One's right side up and one's upside down because it's a parallel universe. And then we have heart fabric, mustache, and piano keys. It makes sense to me. It just does. This quilt actually does have a label, which maybe now is a good time to talk about labels, because it's like one of the only ones that gets a label. I don't know why. I don't usually label my quilts. I just don't feel like it, I guess. I mean, but I also think, like, I filmed a video, you know what I mean? Like, I filmed a video and put the whole thing on YouTube, so it's not as though the story is lost. It's not going anywhere. I did like the original pattern. There was nothing wrong with the original pattern that I needed to change it. It's just that I don't super like to do things that a lot of other people are doing. Sometimes I just feel the need to Davitize it. So that's essentially the reason behind Davitizing it. But that's essentially it. Let's go on. Let's move to the next quilt. All right, so this is the 365 Houses of Dave's Craft Room Land. And each one of these little houses is foundation paper pieced based off of a pattern by Jean. I actually have it over here. Can you see that? This is the pattern, and it's a pretty simple pattern, and I just had to do it 365 times. I think I originally saw this idea on a Karen Brown video. I can't remember which one, but I think she was probably talking about conquering Mount Scrapmore or something. And so she mentioned someone else who had made a similar quilt based off of the pattern. And so I made mine. Each one of these little windows is 3/4 of an inch, and they are all different from one another. And it took me 8 months. Realistically, I wasn't working that whole time. Wherever there's not a house, there's just a random, like there's a cheeseburger, these are eyeballs, aliens, and stuff. And then there's night sky, some pieces of night sky around the edge. I kind of liked it. I kind of wanted it to be a night sky vibe. Yeah, I was really glad to see this done. And I machine quilted it. Obviously, was not gonna sit there and hand quilt this thing. But it's long and thin. I might have made it a little bit wider. Sometimes on paper, your rectangle doesn't seem as long and thin on paper as it is when you have the quilt in front of you. So that's why this would be something I would put on a twin bed. That's all. Let's go to the next one. All right, this is my color change quilt. And I made this quilt out of t-shirt jersey that changes color with the heat of your hand. I interfaced the jersey, and then I just made an improv quilt with it, and I wanted to have these like big swatches of the color and then surrounded by like patchwork chunks. That's how I designed it. And you can actually put your heat of your hand on it and see that it changes color with your hand. I don't really like pastel colors, so I'm not the biggest fan of this quilt. I think it's cool to have a color changing quilt. Also, the back is t-shirt jersey because the back is also color changing fabric. I don't remember what kind of batting is in there. This quilt is machine quilted with vertical lines, parallel 1 inch apart, I think. And the backing is brought around the front to serve as the binding. So that's really it for this quilt. Next. You know, I already filmed an outro to this original video, and now I'm finding like all these like little strings on it, and I'm like, were they there in the outro? This is my quilt inspired by Japanese Ukiyo-e art, which that's a traditional Japanese style of woodblock printing from like the 1800s, I think. And the most famous piece in the West is Hokusai's The Great Wave off Kanagawa, which is here. The inspiration for this quilt was obviously the art, but I went to Hokusai's museum in Tokyo and I saw the original artwork. I was shocked to discover how small it is. It's about this big. When I went to that museum, I was inspired to figure out how to make it into a quilt. So that's where this came from. I went online and I found some fabric that had the art on it, and I made a quilt out of it, and all I did was take 1.5 inch wide strips of light blue and dark blue, red and dark red, and I just got to piecing, and that's literally all I did. The backing is blue plaid flannel, and that's it. It's just a throw size. Half of the artwork is by Hokusai, and the other half of the artwork is by someone else I can't remember. You have to go watch the video to find out, but that's it. Next. This is my random scraps crazy quilt that the Quilting Goddesses designed. And basically, I have my Mount Scrapmore bin that I put scraps in, and I didn't look. I just closed my eyes and pulled from the scrap bin, and whatever I pulled out, I had to use. So that's basically how this quilt came together. It's a crazy quilt, a scrap crazy quilt with a t-shirt jersey backing. I like making scrap quilts. If I recall correctly, at the time I made this, I was working on the 17 Sandra Gorful quilt, maple and eucalyptus pattern, and that was taking up so much creative energy and time that I made this as a palette cleanser. I was like, I don't even want to think about it, I just want a piece. And it's also to use up some other things in my craft room. Like I have piles and piles of t-shirt jersey. These are the backs of people's shirts. Like when I make people a t-shirt quilt, usually you don't use the back or you don't use the whole back. And so I just have piles of it. I don't throw it away either because that would be kind of a waste. So I used it as a backing for this. It was kind of an experiment to see if that would work. And it does. You know, it works. It's not, I mean, whether it's beautiful or not is in the eye of the beholder, but it definitely works in a utilitarian sense. And then I just also appliqued on some patches because I have so many patches in there for no reason. I also hand quilted this with embroidery floss. I love to see the huge stitches of the embroidery floss quilting. I like big stitches, I like little stitches, I like it all. Lots of scraps that I recognize from plenty of other quilts. Here's the mustache quilt, here's the Cheez-It quilt. That Cheez-It fabric will be in every quilt. Here's some piano keys from the Cityscape Up and Down quilt. There are sharks. Around this time, I made Olivia's shark quilt, which you will not see on this video because I already gave it to Olivia. Here's blue flannel from the blue plaid flannel quilt, which you'll see in this video. My friend Chelsea gave me this horse fabric. She did not like it. I don't like it either, but I have it. Okay, let's move on. All right, this quilt is the world's ugliest quilt. And the story behind this quilt is that I originally started piecing these blocks. These are blocks here. Almost 2 years ago now, but it was my very first attempt at filming a video. And it just wasn't going well. Eventually I ended up kind of scrapping the video, but then I still had this pile of blocks and that old footage, and I turned it into this. And I took all the random things from around my craft room that made no sense for their existence, like here's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I just amalgamated them together into a quilt where I did not make any attempt to like make it cohesive or beautiful and lovely at all. The, you know, beauty ugliness spectrum, it comes back around. Sometimes it can get so ugly that it comes back around to beautiful. I like the quilt, obviously, I mean, I made it. And in that video, you can see the early footage because I spliced in the very early footage. I didn't even have a mustache yet at the time, and I didn't know how to make videos. So I like the quilt, and the backing is charm squares. I had a huge stack of charm squares for no reason, so I sewed them up and used it as a backing, and then I quilted it from the back using the charm squares as a grid. So that's it, it's heavy. Cool, let's move on. All right, people, here goes my deco quilt. This quilt is made from the pattern Deco by, I think, Lo and Behold Designs. I love the pattern very much. I was not obsessed with my own choices in this case. The inspiration idea was New Mexico night sky, and so that's why this is moon fabric, and this is the night sky fabric. This is meant to look like kind of like stars. And then the blue is supposed to be like turquoise, and then it's dark because night, you know what I mean? And then the brown is because like the desert, New Mexico. Some people in the comments didn't get it. It's just a rendering, you know what I mean? It's just inspiration. I didn't set out to make an actual picture of the night sky over New Mexico. It's just a quilt. So it's probably not necessary to think too much on it. But also, a lot of people tended to think that this was orange. I don't know if maybe on the camera it looks orange. To me it looks like, well, I can see it in real life and it is brown. To me on the camera it looks brown, but maybe that's just because I've seen it in real life, so I know that it is brown. So anyway, I turned out to be a little bit lukewarm on it just because I was afraid there was kind of like too much brown. I thought if I would do it again, I would prefer to switch the brown out with one of the blues. These gray bits here, which could look like stars, kind of don't really read as anything. They're just kind of like blah, because the brown doesn't really contrast with the gray enough. So I might have used moon fabric for them instead. But you know what? You win some, you lose some. A lot of times you don't know how it's gonna look until you're already too late to change it. I also would have preferred to make it a little bit wider. It's a little bit long and thin, but since it's constructed on point, it's really not that easy to just add another row. You can't really add another row to a quilt that's on point after the rows have been sewn together. You know what I mean? That just won't. You'd have to pick, you just have to, it's too much. It was not worth it. So yeah, that's kind of the tea with this quilt. People in the comments did like it. A lot of people liked it. So, and I don't think it's ugly either. I just kind of would prefer maybe less brown. And this already less brown than what it originally had, because I think I originally had brown somewhere that I switched for, like, I think moon fabric. I think these were originally brown. I just would like to see more blue. I think if this light blue and the brown were switched, it would be better. It wouldn't be night sky anymore, maybe the dark blue. I wanted New Mexico night sky. I do think I achieved my goal, regardless of what the comments say, because the brown is supposed to represent dirt and desert, and then the blue turquoise is supposed to represent turquoise that's found in the desert, and then the moon and the stars. So that's really New Mexico. It makes sense to me. It's like I said, you probably shouldn't think about it too hard, but that's that. Let's move on. All right, people. This is my epic masterpiece, English paper pieced quilt. I pieced and assembled every part of this quilt by hand with a needle and thread. I pieced all 3,286 of these 1.5" hexes by hand, and I quilted it by hand, and I put the binding on also by hand. There's no machine work in this quilt whatsoever. It took me 2 years. I did this all over the world. I mean, I worked on this in the United States, in Japan, Philippines, Thailand, Guam. That's the United States, but I don't remember where all else, but it is in a video, including sometimes when I fully had COVID. And so this is one of the things I did on quarantine. And there's also patches on here that I added for even more interest. And you know, there's chunks where I like kind of followed a pattern mixed with, you know, where I didn't follow a pattern. Like, this quilt is very interesting to me because when I look at some of the early work, like this work here and this stuff, those stitches are so ugly. I did not do a good job in the early days. But then when I come over here and I remember that this is the last part I did, the stitches look so much better. So the whole quilt is like a record of the life journey. And like, I better be good at it now. I pieced over 3,000 hexes, so I better be good at it. I remember when I started doing this, I was in a hotel in, I think, Florida, and just like so bored because I was away from my craft room and I needed to do something. And so instead I'm watching crafting videos on YouTube, because if I can't craft, I can at least vicariously enjoy crafting content. And that's when I found Mixed Domestics' video on how to do it. And I immediately got in my rental car and drove to Michael's. It was 8:50 and they closed at 9 p.m. I had 10 minutes to run inside and buy fat quarters. And let me see if I can find, it was this section. This was the first chunk I did with those Michael's fat quarters. And from there, I just worked on it for the next 2 years. So then once I was done with the quilt top, I got the backing. This backing is a black, solid black bed sheet, black flannel sheet. And the thing is, I think you can use a sheet for the backing. Not all bed sheets are created equal, so not necessarily any sheet would work. This is a flannel sheet, so I think like that's heavier and warmer than like a regular sheet that you would get that's so thin and I wouldn't necessarily want to use. But since I wanted to do the whole thing by hand, I didn't want to piece the backing. So that was why I went with the king size sheet. Not that I need to have a good reason, because I've used the sheets for other things too. But Then I folded the sheet over and then I hand stitched the binding down. That was my first time doing it. I did not find it to be hard. It's just a ladder stitch, but also this is black and I used black thread, so if there's flaws, you're really not gonna see them. So that's it. This was one of my most epic quilts, but I need to stop saying that because a lot of my quilts are epic. Cool, let's go on. This quilt is called Put That Thing Back Where It Came From or So Help Me, and it uses Kaffe Fassett's Woven Stripes collection. It was named by my good Judy Abby, who I work with. She came over as I had it on the design wall and I asked her what to name it, and she said, well, she said that it reminded her of Monsters, Inc., the beginning credits when it has the doors coming up and all that. I absolutely love this quilt, and I love it because I love the fabric, and honestly, with Kaffe Fassett fabric, the fabric does all the work for you. I could have just cut it up into squares and sewn it together and it would have been beautiful because the fabric colors are so beautiful and lovely. Even what I did do is really quite simple. All I did was make these like little snakes. I experimented with multiple different ways of putting the snake on. You have to go watch the video to see how I ultimately landed on doing it. After I did the quilt top, I did some big stitch embroidery floss quilting. And in that video, I predicted that Kaffe was gonna reach out to me soon asking to do a collab, and I think he still might. I'm gonna start another Kaffe Fassett fabric quilt soon, so we'll see what happens. I can tell you that his partner Brandon surely did comment on the video saying he liked it. And I hope he showed it to Kaffe. I have no way of knowing until I become friends with Kaffe, which I probably will soon. This is the back. The back doesn't really match. You know, often with the backing, I just kind of pick. Because I make so many quilts, I gotta use stuff. I just gotta use whatever I have at hand for the backing. Whatever I use is what I use. Kaffe, by the way, my email address is davescraftroom@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out anytime. And let's go on to the next quilt. This is actually one of my favorite quilts of all time. This is the only quilt I can recall working on where I actually wanted to keep working on it forever. I was actually sad to finish. I wanted to make more, but I just had to get it done. These are embroidered. I embroidered all these airplanes and I chose my favorite airplanes or some airplanes that had like some type of story behind them, and each of these airplanes has like an interesting story, which I told in the video. I didn't tell the story of each block in the video, but I know the stories of them, and I love it. My dad appeared in that video to give me some ideas on which planes I should add. I did white on blue in order to make it look like a blueprint. That was the idea. And then, I don't think you can probably see this, but I quilted a grid. So again, grid lines to make it look like a blueprint. The back is blue plaid flannel. And then a white binding. I really love embroidery. I'll show you my other embroidery quilts soon. But I did the Zombroidery one, and now I've done airplanes. And I've been on the hunt for another category of things to do for an embroidery quilt because I like doing embroidery, but I haven't encountered an idea yet good enough because it has to be something out of the ordinary. Like I already did zombies. I just want to do something that's like interesting and a little bit obscure, something original that I can really Davitize. If you have any suggestions, feel free to put them in the comments. Know that I may not use it, but feel free to suggest something in the comments. So that's all for the airplane quilt. Let's move on. All right, this is my mustache quilt. The idea came from these masks. These things right here were originally COVID masks that I had bought at I think Walmart or something. And obviously when I bought them, I was like, I'm gonna use these, but eventually they will make it into a quilt. And this is that quilt. I love it. I love it very much. This block right here was made from a page from the Mustache coloring book. I still plan to turn that coloring book into a quilt, so stay tuned. I don't know when I'll get to it. And then the rest is just like, this came from kind of a shirt that was really ugly. I don't really like clothing that's kind of too loud. I may like the fabric in a quilt, but not to wear. So that's why I cut it up. This is burlap, and that was a scientific experiment. Some people in the comments were concerned that it would deteriorate in the wash. It didn't. Oh, well, this is the back. And I had this flannel mustache business. Obviously, I ran out of the black and I had to put a strip of the brown there. This is another case where I really just pieced the back piecemeal. I know there's some quilters that actually like line up the stripes on the fabric that they're gonna use for a backing. You won't catch me doing that. So yeah, that's the mustache quilt. So let's go to the next quilt. This is my Zombroidery quilt. And I think I coined the term Zombroidery. I'm not 100% sure, it may exist. These are Zombroidery blocks. The idea came from, I really love the traditional red work embroidery quilts from the olden days. And so I wanted to make my own, but obviously I need to Daviditize it. So I took the opportunity to tell the story of how I survived the zombie apocalypse that hit in 2016. And this quilt tells the whole story. I tell the story in the video. It's one of my favorite quilts of all time. I need to stop saying that. I only make quilts when I'm really excited about the idea, so multiple of them are gonna be like my favorite. I tried to make this according to the rules of traditional red work embroidery. The zombie image came from coloring pages that I got off Etsy. They were like $3.50 and they were just coloring pages, and I saw them and I thought these are perfect for my quilt. I think I used carbon paper or I traced them through my iPad or whatever. I mean, that wouldn't be the traditional way, but it doesn't really matter how you get them on that page as long as you get them on there with preferably some type of washable marker because it may show through. So I used washable for the most part. Some of the rules of red work embroidery, you want to have all your stitches be exactly the same length because that just shows that you take pride in your work. And then you also want to avoid traveling. So instead of going like an inch from here to there, tie it off, cut it, and then go because the red work will shadow through. I followed the rules for the most part. I definitely cheated in some places, but also it's the zombie apocalypse, so are these rules really a big deal? Not really, you know what I mean? I like to take pride in my work and do it perfectly, but also I'm doing it for fun. And then I hand quilted it. I love this hand quilting job. It turned out so crinkly, just like the old-timey quilts that you see that are like this. I tried to use small stitches. I tried to make the stitches even like what you would want to see in a traditional hand-quilted quilt, and I quilted diamonds. And what's interesting about this quilt job is that I recall, this was about almost a year ago, I had to do an online class. I take graduate classes online, and I had to be in front of the Zoom camera. I acted like these were my notes or this was my textbook and I was just looking through the notes or something, but in reality, I was stitching the hand quilting stitches in, and nobody ever knew that that's what I was doing. So I definitely got away with it, and I quilted this right in the middle of class. I don't feel bad about it at all. I still passed the class. But yeah, the backing is just the same muslin too. Same thing, I mean, it's the same muslin, and then the binding also is muslin. So let's move on now to the next quilt. The name of this quilt is called Order. And the story behind this quilt is that my friend Austin and his wife Emma came over to my house last year and we did bleached tie-dye. We did all different methods. This is toilet bowl cleaner. Other stuff of it is just random, like we put painter's tape on here, did that, and you can watch the video. We did all different techniques on how to do bleached tie-dye, or sometimes it's called reverse tie-dye, I think. That's Austin's hand. I sat with the fabric for a long time, not knowing what to do with it because I was gonna have to cut it up to make it into a quilt, but I didn't want to cut it up and like ruin the striking designs of it. So ultimately I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna cut it into squares and sew it into squares, and then whatever's left over after that, then I'll sew that up into a random improv quilt called Chaos. So this is Order, and it has a sibling quilt called Chaos. I no longer have Chaos because I gave Chaos to Emma for her birthday. And the funny story about that is I wanted Emma to have the better of the two quilts, because why do I need it? You know what I mean? I would want, if I'm gonna give it away, I would want the person to have the best one. So I thought this one was better, and I thought she was gonna want this one. So I gave it to her, but then I showed her Chaos too, and she preferred Chaos better. So I gave her Chaos, which is, it works out because each of us has the quilt that we thought was the better one. So that's fine. Also, this one was bigger. Of course, Emma is a small, Emma's like the size of Lady Gaga. She's like 5'2" or something. I don't know, but Emma's a small girl. She doesn't need a huge quilt. And also I tied that quilt. Tying is an interesting phenomenon within quilting because in some circles it's kind of looked down on. I don't think that way at all. I really liked the effect of the ties in Chaos, and so did Emma. Emma really liked the tie. That was one of the features that she liked about it. Since I tied that quilt, I've tied multiple other quilts, and I too like it because it's adding interest of the ties. You know what I mean? So we don't look down on any quilting methods. You know, not every quilt needs to be machine quilted or hand quilted or tied, whatever. You know what I mean? You choose the method that you choose for that quilt. So this one has hand embroidery floss here, and then it has tacks, 1, 2, 3, 4 tacks. I thought that was enough. It turned out not to be enough. On this day, I was kind of towing the line of how little quilting can I get away with here, and the batting shifted a little bit, so I smoothed it out as best as I could, and then I added a grid across the whole thing of more quilting. So the batting will no longer shift. Where it has shifted, I've tried to flatten it out and make it perfect. Realistically, there's still a couple of lumpy bits, but it's okay. You know what I mean? It'll be fine. Emma's quilt doesn't have that. Emma's quilt is perfectly flat. The batting did shift. So that's all for Order. I'm very happy for Emma to have Chaos and use Chaos. And let's move on to the next quilt. This is my flannel quilt, and the majority of this flannel comes from the Robert Kaufman Mammoth Flannel collection, which I got in fat quarters online. I really liked the blue plaid flannel, and I made this improv quilt with it, also adding blue plaid flannel from my own stash. Actually, this is gingham, but whatever, close enough. I like it. This is a two-sided quilt. I'll show you the back in a second, but this again, I did the inside out method. I hand quilted it with embroidery floss. I love this quilt because it's so drapey and it's so floppy, and it's also very warm with the flannel and very soft, and I use this quilt often. And I'm pretty sure when my mom stayed with me in the spring, she slept on my couch, she used this quilt too. Let me show you the back. Or actually, it's not really the back at all. It's the other side of a two-sided quilt. I think it's ugly, and I love it. You know, the lack of balance is so thorough that it almost looks intentional. It's basically a 4-patch beside a square, and that's literally all it is. There are some scraps of the blue that were left over, but this is mostly just other flannel from my stash that I wanted to sew up into a quilt. And you know, doing it this way can be a bit taxing for whatever reason. I don't know why. And so doing it this way, where it was a very repetitive, like just doing a stack of all the same things, is kind of a relief after this style of piecing. So that's why I did them both. Although I consider it a two-sided quilt, reversible. I usually kind of consider this the back. Not for any reason other than, I mean, it's ugly, but I like it even though it's ugly. So I don't know if that really means it's ugly. I don't know, and I use it. You know, not all of my quilts get used because I'm only one dude and I only have so many friends and family members, but this one does get used. I'm glad for that. And that's really all there is to it. I didn't treat the flannel in any way. I didn't interface it, I didn't starch it, I just used it the way it was, and that was fine. Some people probably would want to interface it or starch it or do something to make sure it doesn't stretch, but I was just like, whatever, I don't feel like it, so I didn't. That's all. So, okay, now let's move on to the next one. All right, we come to my necktie quilt. One of my favorite quilts and one of my most successful videos of all time, which was a bit of a shocker. I'm always surprised when the videos do like extra well. So these are all made of neckties. Neckties, which of course are on the bias, so you have to treat it in some type of way. You don't have to, but it makes it a lot easier to work with if you do something to it to prevent it from stretching. So some options are you can sew it to a foundation, which I tried. You can iron on and iron on interfacing, which I also tried, or you can starch it, and I tried that too. And all three of those methods are in this quilt. And the final result, when you look at it, you probably can't tell which is which unless you come up and really feel and look at it. Each method has its own benefits and downfalls, and I go over all that in the video. I like the quilt very much, but it turned out to be so controversial that I now have mixed feelings. I'm happy doing things the way I'm doing them, so when people comment saying I should have done it a different way, it's like, sometimes the comments like that, it kind of irritates me because I'm making my art and I'm sharing my art, and I know that everybody has their opinions, but if someone's happy with their art the way they're doing it, why do you need to tell them to do it a different way? You know what I mean? Just let them be happy. That's just kind of the bottom line. Every quilt video I put out, I get people that tell me I should have done it a different way. Just know that I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. But I really did like making this quilt. Neckties is definitely a challenge because of all those things I said, because it's on the bias and it's so wibbly wobbly, and there's no method that makes it perfect and easy to work with. There's methods that make it a little bit better. This is what I chose to do. These are 1.5" strips, and then there's various parts where I made it wider to add more interest and keep more of the tie image, whatever was on there. And then all I did was literally just, so it's quite a simple pattern, but since the fabrics and all that are so busy, I think a simple pattern was most effective. Let's move on to the next quilt. All right, this is my Hawaiian quilt. This quilt is where I really cut my teeth with the needle turn applique technique that is used in Hawaiian quilting. And Hawaiian quilts often have a huge motif. In this case, I opted for 12 small ones. I learned this method from watching Sissy on her video from Po'akalani Quilts. I also have their books. And this again was one of my earliest videos. I may not even have a mustache in that video, but I made a couple of those blocks when I was moving, because this is a very good project to pack up and do in a hotel. You know, the Hawaiian quilts, the designs are based off of plants usually, and the plants often have some type of cultural significance in Hawaiian culture. That's true for all of these except the snowflake, because as I was doing it, I was very, very far from home, as I do live very, very far from Pennsylvania now. I live on an island, and it doesn't snow here. That was why I added this snowflake block, because I was like, I want something that represents my home, which I come from Pennsylvania. It snows a good amount in Pennsylvania, and I was missing the snow. It was winter here at the time, but there was no snow. It was hot. It's hot in winter here. So that was why I put a snowflake block. I made the unfortunate mistake of just making this offhand remark that I don't think it even really snows in Hawaii. Every couple of weeks since then, for over a year, I get another comment telling me that yes, it does snow in Hawaii. And I know that they do have mountain peaks where it snows at the top of the mountains, but like, I'm from Pennsylvania, you know what I mean? But Hawaii has many, many things that I enjoyed when I visited there in 2019. Let's just clear the air on the snowflake gate. I'm still living here on my island. I'm gonna go home to Pennsylvania soon, I think, and hopefully we'll see snow there. I haven't seen snow in years because even before I lived here, I lived in New Mexico, I didn't see any snow there. I know it snows in New Mexico, but it didn't snow in my town that I was living in the 3 or so years that I lived there. This is all by hand, needle turn applique, and I really like the technique. I love anything that's very repetitive and meditative. And then once I sewed the blocks together into the quilt top, I hand quilted it. And it's really good to hand quilt the Hawaiian quilt style because it's echo and you don't need to mark your lines or nothing because you can just echo. And they say that you should put a pinky finger width in between, and that's what I did. But yeah, I really like this quilt a lot. What's on the back? Oh, this is red plaid flannel. I didn't even remember that. Cool. So let's go on to the next quilt. This quilt is called Half of One, 6 Dozen of the Other. It is a bit wild. It's constructed mainly of upholstery fabric samples from, I think, the 70s, according to the eBay listing. And then I was just doing a lot of experimentation with FlexiFuse raw edge applique, and I just made some art blocks. So what you see here is all collage art blocks. And then I fastened them together in a quilt. Pieced, obviously, a backing from flannel. The idea to use upholstery fabric in a quilt top was new to me and not something I had done or seen done before. It turned out fine. This has been washed and dried and so forth, and everything turned out fine. So I was very pleased about that. Yeah, so this is all raw edge applique, and I was not the biggest fan of raw edge applique initially, and I kind of did this to see whether I could take to it. And I did, and now I incorporate both into my quilts. I do raw edge applique and I do turned edge applique. So again, it just depends on what's going on, but I really love this quilt, as did the people in the comments, because it is literally just collage art on a quilt. So that's really it. So let's go on to the next quilt. This is my cyanotype quilt, another one of my very early videos. Cyanotypes are so fascinating. Cyanotypes are basically fabric, or it can be multiple different materials, but in this case fabric that's been treated with a chemical that reacts with the sunlight. So wherever the sunlight hits it, it changes to a permanent blue dye. So basically I was able to put objects onto the top of the treated fabric, place it into the sunlight, and then create these relief images. So we have like my keys. These are photo negatives. There's like headphones, watches, scissors, plants. This is cilantro. And I could print things on transparency sheets too, meant for overhead projector. These are spring onions. And it was really cool. And then all I did was sew them up with muslin and use blue embroidery floss for the quilting. I made another cyanotype quilt out of human x-rays, which was really cool. I no longer have it. I gave it to my dad's friend and she's enjoying it, so she's welcome to have it. But yeah, that's my cyanotype quilt. So next, all right, this is the next quilt. I like this quilt very much. I actually don't think I've revisited this since pretty much I made it, but I had a drawer of random blocks, and that's kind of something I do often. Matter of fact, I still have another pile that I've made since I made this one. These are just random things, like when I finish something and I have like leftover scraps. Usually it goes in a scrap bin, but sometimes I'll just sew it right up into a scrappy block, and that's what a lot of these are. And like this one, and this one, I remember from when I sewed my cousin Anne her baby quilt, which was a robot quilt. I made each robot, and this one too, and those were the leftover fabrics from the robot. This one was my grandfather's clothing, just the tiny scraps, because I didn't want to throw any scraps of that away, but they were just tiny scraps, so I sewed it up into a block. I don't have that quilt anymore. I gave it to her for her baby. These lava lamps are from my lava lamp quilt that I gave to Austin, the baby Yoda quilt that I gave to Matt, and just kind of some other random things. Using improv techniques, I surrounded each one with black and they kind of float in this sea of black. The back is pieced stuff. That's a technical term, because again, it's just using up whatever I have around. I can see a black binding, and then it's quilted with straight lines going across it. I like it. I like the quilt very much. I vaguely remember being lukewarm about it at the time I made it, but now I really like it. Drawer Orphans, that's what the video was called, Drawer Orphans. Cool, let's go on. This is my wildlife quilt. This was an idea that I saw on a channel called, I think, The Fabric Patch. Once they put out that video, I saw multiple other quilting YouTubers, including myself, take the idea and run with it, which is probably great. That's why they put it out there, right? I thought it was a good idea because I had this fabric panel with these wildlife images on it, and I also had this giant lion, which is from the same line of fabric, and I realized that it would be perfect to do the idea. I would get to use up the mostly brown and green fabric scraps, which I don't normally vibe with. So this was a chance to take all the green and browns in my stash and use them. And basically what you do is you sew up strip units, and then you cut those into strips, and then you use those strips to log cabin your panels that you cut out. Tracy did it on the sewing channel, and she framed some white chunks, and then she used the white chunks as a canvas for her free motion quilting, which I thought was a great idea as well. I'm not that great at free motion quilting. It was a good idea. I had this giant lion here, and I framed him, and then what ended up happening was a partial seam situation. So yeah, I like it very much. At the back is like, I forget where I got this cat fabric, but I had so much of this cat fabric. It really doesn't match at all. That's not something I care about. It's cats, and it's blue and orange and cats. I had so much of it, I had to just use it. I hand quilted this with embroidery floss, big stitch quilting, vertical lines going all the way across it. I like it. It kind of conjures rain, like the rainforest, and then it's a scrappy binding as well. This one hung in the background of my videos for a while, where the Cheez-It one is now. A lot of people like this quilt. I was so glad to get to use some brown and green scraps and that fabric panel that I found. So that's all. Let's go to the next one. All right, this quilt. I've actually had to zoom out the lens to get the whole thing in the frame. This is the sequel to the 100 Days, 100 Blocks 2023 challenge, Bonkers layout. You basically take the pattern and you make more blocks of each block, and then there's a bonus expansion pack layout, and that's what this is. So as I was making the original quilt, I pieced extra blocks to make this. I think this is the biggest quilt I've ever made. It has to be, right? I can't recall ever making a quilt that hung off the edge. It is an absolute bonkers monstrosity, chaos land. The backing here is a sheet. I did that as a hack because I did not feel like piecing however many yards. I felt like it would be like 12 yards and cotton batting. And I tied it first, as well as I then machine quilted it on top of the ties. And the binding is hand done on, I don't know how long it took. It took me probably 3 or 4 months. Well, there's 100 days. I was done before the end of the 100 days, I think. At least with the blocks. The blocks is really what took the longest time, but I did them within the 100 days. Now, assembling them did not take as long. It is so extra. I mean, I've had people tell me they're using this as their desktop background, which is crazy. Karen Brown designed it from Just Get It Done Quilts. Not too many people made the Bonkers layout, so I was proud to be among the few that did it. So that's it. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so this quilt is gonna start us off on a series of quilts that I made using Karen Nyberg's Earth Views fabric line. And Karen Nyberg is an astronaut, and when she went to outer space, she actually brought a sewing kit with her, and she made a quilt block in outer space. And she also invited everybody on Earth to make quilt blocks and send them in, and the quilt blocks would be used to make quilts. They made dozens of quilts. So while she was up there, she also took photographs of the Earth, and then when she came back down, she used the photographs and turned them into a fabric line called Earth Views. And she herself is also a quilter, and she, along with Sarah Ruiz, published some patterns. So I made 2 of the patterns. This is one of them, called Orbital Views, and basically just a black background. And you know, since we're talking about Earth, it was important to recycle. So I used t-shirt jersey. I have so many t-shirt scrap that this is all black jersey, and the black of each t-shirt is ever so slightly different. To me, it gives it like a folk art quality as well as like the letters, but then it's just circles appliqued on to a black background. That's literally all it is. And I added this, spacefaring or extinct, because Carl Sagan has a quote where it's like, the human race will either become spacefaring or extinct. Then I did some vertical lines as well as free motion quilting around here. The thing I remember about this quilt is that an earthquake hit as I was working on it, and the earthquake is seen on camera, and it knocked over my tripod. I do live in an earthquake area, and when my mom visited, she and I experienced a 6.2 level earthquake. But the one on camera is only like a 3 or something. It's a very small level. So yeah, let me show you the next quilt in this series. I made a total of 5, but 2 of them I gave away. So let me show you the next one. This pattern was called, I think, Cupola Views. And the cupola is basically the window on the space station where she looked out and was able to take the photos and everything. And this is essentially the shape of the cupola window that can look out into space and down at the Earth. And then I added this astronaut because I had a panel that I found somewhere, I don't even remember where, that had an astronaut floating in space. So I cut her out and put her out there, and I wanted her to look like as if she was out in space floating outside the window. Karen was gracious enough to comment on the Instagram post about it, saying how much she liked my version, and she especially liked the crew member chillaxing outside. So I was very proud of that to get her attention. This was one of my very popular quilts that hung in the background for a while, and it got a lot of comments. The circles here are actually pieced in, they're not applique. The pattern calls for applique, and you can do applique, it works very well as well, but these are pieced in, that is set in, using a method called the 6-minute circle that was invented by Dale Fleming. I use that method in a lot of my quilts, and I love it because you can piece a circle in, it's easy. Anyway, watch the video and you can see it. Cool, so let me bring up the next Karen Nyberg quilt. So this is the quilt that I designed myself using Karen Nyberg's line. There's no pattern for this. I basically took all the blue ones out and I pieced a background, and then all the brown and green, like earth colored basically, prints, I took them out and made North and South America and Greenland. The way I did this was I traced the color of Greenland, of the Americas onto here with a map, and then I sewed strips on and I flipped them and sewed the next one on. I put it like face down, sewed it on, and then flipped it. Someone in the comments called it fliplique. I guess you could call it fliplique. And then I turned in the raw edges and I top stitched around the raw edges. They're not raw anymore, around the underturned edges, so that we have an underturned border all the way around it. You know, it's fabric, it's not gonna be a perfect rendering. It's just a representation of the Americas. There are these circles here that I pieced in, and and that was to kind of draw the three together into a series, because all three of them now have circles. So, I have to show you the back too. Then for quilting it, I did lines, I did echo lines, so it is kind of reminiscent of a topographical map. So let me show you the back. I really like the back, actually. The back is like kind of stunning in its own right, honestly, but I just had a layer cake of the fabric left, so I just sewed them up to make a backing. You know, if this was a quilt all by itself, I would think it's kind of cool looking. I did make one more quilt. No, I made kind of two more. I made one more full size, and then I made a baby quilt, kind of the same thing. And I gave those to my friends, Colin and Rachel. They have the big one and then the small one for their baby. And I put airplanes across it, and I made it look like kind of like fields. I no longer have those, but you can still watch the video. So that's it for the Karen Nyberg series, and let's go on. All right, this is my denim and bias tape quilt. This quilt is called February Get Ink. It's named after a poem by Boris Pasternak. It's made of denim from jeans from the thrift store, some from the thrift store, some of them were my old jeans. I like how all the different shades of denim kind of mesh together, and then this is bias tape appliqued on. I was just goofing around with the bias tape maker and experimenting with that, and bias tape is cool because you can wiggle it like this, you can curve it, and it still stays flat because of the way the bias works. It just stays flat. This is a very, very heavy quilt because this is the backing, this is the plaid flannel, this is a heavy flannel. So you have a thick flannel backing. Denim is already kind of thick and heavy. And then I still put a batting in. Many people don't. If they're making a denim quilt, they won't use a batting because denim's already so heavy that you don't need it. But I wanted extra level, next level heavy. So I did still put a batting in and then a blue binding. And that's it. That's February Get Ink. Next. So this quilt is Lovely McIntyre, and I think this might be my most popular video of all time. I was very shocked. It was one of my first 5 videos. When I started my channel, I put out 5 videos, and this was one of them. I got like 30K or 40K views right away, and I didn't really know why. I never really know why. It definitely was not the thumbnail. Often the thumbnail is the thing that people click on, but I didn't know how to make thumbnails back then, so it was not a thumbnail. But this is made with the Riley Blake Crayola box of fat quarters that looks like crayons. These are illusion blocks. They're easy to make. What's kind of interesting about this quilt is I kind of announced that it's based off of a pattern, and people kind of mistakenly thought I was using the pattern. I didn't read the pattern, and so they were asking me to post the pattern for it, and it's like, I didn't read it, I didn't follow it. I just looked at the block and I made the block the size I wanted to make it, because the size in the pattern would not be conducive for using fat quarters, because you needed 14-inch squares. So you would only get one. That would be so much fabric wasted out of a fat quarter that instead I made them 7 inches. So I was able to get 2 or 4, I don't know. I was able to get multiple out of each fat quarter. So I was not able to publish the pattern. By the time the video came out, I had filmed the video a year ago, and I didn't know where the pattern was anymore. I don't have it. I never used it in the first place. So that's kind of why, unfortunately, I was never able to. But, you know, this is not like something that could be, you know, it's kind of like a log cabin block. Like, nobody owns it. You know what I mean? Anybody can make it. I've seen loads of them on Pinterest. I made the blocks. I sewed them together into these 4 patches of, you know, the 2 on either side. And it's really cool. It's a really striking image, because of the bright colors, because of the contrasting colors. And then I added more interest by adding these patches on. I like to do that. I like to add a lot of patches onto my quilt to make them really stunning. This is not flannel. I know it looks like flannel, but this is just cotton patchwork fabric from, I think, Hobby Lobby. And the label is here. The quilt is called Lovely McIntire. I don't know why. Sometimes the quilts just name themselves, and this is Lovely McIntire. Okay, next. This quilt is my abstract, solid colors, curvy piecing, crazy quilt that I call More is More. And basically I had made Lovely McIntire, and these were all the scraps from Lovely McIntire as well as various other solids from my stash. I started with the scraps but I kept adding more fabric in. I was just having fun with curved piecing and just slashing through stuff, sewing it back together, and that's literally all I did. And I recall that I did not use a ruler in this quilt at all. No ruler. It's a myth that you need to use a ruler to get your quilts to lay flat. You don't. So what I like about this is that I had pieced 3 chunks, 1, 2, and 3, and there was these cracks in between it. And so I filled the cracks with this adding machine tape pieced grouting. I love it. It's very abstract. There's just this random log cabin in there. Even that I did not use a ruler at all. It's just piecing, and wherever your rotary cutter goes, that's that. And you can make it lay flat by making it lay flat. So that's it. That's More is More. I really like this section here. That's my favorite. Like a bowling pin. Cool, let's go to the next one. There's only like a couple left. Why did I make so many quilts? I've been doing this forever. All right, this is my math prime numbers quilt. And basically I saw a chart online on, I think, Reddit showing the prime numbers, prime number factorization. And someone said that it would make a great quilt. So I made the quilt. And the way that this quilt works is each prime number is represented by a color. And then numbers that are not prime are represented by factorizations of those numbers. So 2 is the prime number, and then 4 is 2 times 2. And I put this black bias tape divider in there to represent that it's 2 times 2. Just this seam you wouldn't be able to see. If it was different colors, like here you have 2 times 3. And then, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8, and so forth. Anytime you see a solid color, that means 37 is prime. And if you see that color again, it's a product. It's a product of that. I'm trying to remember math. There's like patterns, like you can see the 5. Everything that's divisible by 5 goes up and down. Everything that's even, because 2, those go down in a column. And then the pink 11s. There's even more patterns than that I don't even know. And this is great. I think it's great because you don't need the English language to understand it. So when the aliens come, we'll have like a common ground because math. And I embroidered the numbers on with my free motion foot. And then I sashed each one with 1 inch. And then the back is back. The back is black, and so is the binding. So that's it. I remember that I made this on Christmas break, and every time I see this, I remember like the Christmas movies that I had playing on the TV when I watched it. I like it. I think it's cool. I think it's colorful. I think it's mathematical. And that's it. I have one more quilt. It's Tiffany. All right, last but not least, we have Tiffany. This is Tiffany the Frankenquilt, and this was my first video that I shot from beginning to end, and it was basically my introduction to the world, apart from my 100 days, 100 quilt blocks, but this was my first introduction outside of that. I also introduced the thinking cap in that video. This is my thinking cap. And the story behind it is I had these blocks, disappearing 4-patch blocks. Started making them in my old house when I used to live in New Mexico. And I kind of got bored. I was like, why am I doing this? I don't want to make these disappearing 4-patch. Like, what am I supposed to make with this? A 1-block wonder? Like, this is so random. I don't remember what I thought I was going to do, but I just kind of lost interest in finishing it. So they sat in a drawer, in a UFO drawer. And then it's like, I had set up my new craft room in my new house, which is this house. If you didn't notice on my channel, I finish all my projects because I can't stand even having one unfinished project. A whip is one thing, but you don't catch me with drawers and drawers of unfinished things. Like, I might work on more than one thing at a time to keep my life interesting, but it's not sitting in a drawer. Like, sorry if that offends all you people out there who do that, because I know that everybody else in the quilting world does that, including my own mother. But I don't. I can't. It's like baggage to me. I need to clear it out. I need to clear the cachet. So, but I didn't want to do more of these blocks. I was so bored. So that was why I had the idea to just do something to finish it and just fill it in with fabric that I like. And that's why I have mushrooms, sandwiches, cacti, and then I literally just sewed it up into this Frankenquilt. I didn't need it to make sense. I just wanted to do it, and then I even hand quilted it. And looking back, it's like, why did I think I needed to hand quilt it? I don't know. A lot of people ask me in the comments, like, why hand quilt it? Why not just machine quilt? And I like hand quilting. And the back is Frankenquilt too, because there's mustache, more of that, and then sandwich. And I think this was the first quilt I finished in this house 2 years ago, and I started filming fully a year before I published anything. And I did not even have a mustache at the time. So things were dark. I think that's the last quilt. That's gotta be the last quilt I've gotta show, surely. Because I'm so sick of filming today. All the quilts that you've seen me do here, there's videos of them. There should be links to them. I didn't realize I had made so many quilts until I tried to film a video where I show them all. I hope you enjoy my videos. I set out to do something different. I felt like if I was gonna do a channel, there's so many quilting and crafting channels out there, I have to do something different. So that's kind of the point of my channel. That's probably all I wanna say. Welcome to new subscribers. Welcome to the craft room. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and please come again.